I want to show you something. Portsmouth, New Hampshire. These are lines forming for a chance to see Donald Trump, and not for another hour and a half. Despite all the controversy, despite all these women with their latest allegations, he remains very popular as far as an event to go to. And they're going to run out of space there. This is a common development when it comes to Mr. Trump's events. He is expected to rail against these latest attacks on him, particularly the women and the networks he says are working with them. This tweet says this election is being rigged by the media pushing false and unsubstantiated charges and outright lies in order to elect crooked Hillary. Steve King, Iowa congressman, big Trump supporter, with me right now on the phone. Congressman, he is expected to feature those who will argue what some of these women have said, including this one woman who said that he, was all over her, I think 30 plus years ago on a commercial flight. But that's out there. Should he keep talking about it, or is he justified in clarifying what he says is his innocence?
You know, Neil, I think you need to put a combination of this together. What is prudent political judgment, and how does that match up with Donald Trump's personality? And I just don't know that you can hold him back from rebutting something that he believes is untrue and unjust. And so maybe you need to give him about 24 to 36 hours to burn that part of it down out of his personality, then package it up, then focus back on the issues because he's spoken to it. But 30 years ago in an airplane, none of us are immune from such an allegation. And then these allegations all coming up essentially at the same time, within a couple of days of each other. It does cause one to suspect, where were they before? Why did we hear none of this up until after beginning to and after this last debate? So that's what I would say to him, and focus on these issues. He has an opportunity at this debate coming up to score another unanimous decision over Hillary Clinton. And that's where the focus needs to be. And what's going to move voters out here still is the realization that we could lose our courts, our Constitution, we could lose our borders, we could lose the rule of law with Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump holds all that together and restores it. And I think that's where the center of this needs to be. And I'm going to call upon the American people, have a conscience about where you're directing America when you walk into the voting booth November 8th.
You know, last week when the attention was on St. Louis and we were there, there was a suspicion after the release of the first tapes going back 11 years that there would be other tapes forthcoming or other women forthcoming. And sure enough, there were. Maybe others are being planned if there is a deliberate rollout to sabotage him. If that is the case, then I've heard from those who say he does have a case to counter them directly, especially as he claims that they're false. And to ignore that would be saying they're right. I did this. What do you think?
You're exactly right on that. In fact, the comparison is right there in front of us. The Wikileaks on Hillary Clinton's emails and those of Podesta's and others, they're not. Hillary Clinton has not rejected the truth within them, and no one doubts that those emails that are out of WikiLeaks are true. And so the same thing would go for the allegations about the alleged misconduct for Donald Trump. He's got to rebut them. It's a lot better if some of the rest of us can do that for him, but sometimes you just aren't in a position to do that.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? That there aren't too many like you in the Republican Party doing that.
Well, from where I sit, I don't know anything about these allegations, so I'm not really in a position to rebut them.
I understand.
And none of us defended the statement that he made, and he apologized for it. But I just look at this thing, and I think the rationale of Republicans that think they want to run away from Donald Trump and somehow or another save themselves and other seats to hold the majorities in the House and the Senate, I just think that's the wrong political calculation, that you are joined at the hip with your nominee, like it or not. And that means that once that decision is made, and it's clear that, I'm the national co-chairman for Ted Cruz's for president campaign. I sat back and analyzed the agenda that's coming out of Donald Trump. I heard his speech on Thursday night in Cleveland, his acceptance speech. So every plank along that way is something I can accept, and all but a couple of them I'm enthusiastic about. And that's what we need to do. This has always been about policy. It's always been about an agenda. And we can't let this become about allegations, which I think one thing we can say almost for certain is a number of these allegations are false, if not all of them.
Well, there are a lot of them coming out, and the timing is curious, to your point, Congressman. Thank you very, very much. I should mention, since a lot of these allegations have come out, let's say over the last week or so, the first wave of them, we've added a few $100 billion to our debt. Just saying. Why is no one talking about that? Meet the guy who is. But is anyone listening after this?
Bummer. It doesn't work. That means the company doing the teleprompter is in the back. That means they didn't do a good job. So I won't pay them, right? I won't pay them. You have a bad contractor, don't pay or cut the price. You have a good contractor, get that money out fast. But the country should do the same thing.
All right, I agree with what he said about teleprompter people. You know? Prompter, why did you stop? All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and Donald Trump going right back at critics who say he's callous and heartless when he doesn't pay contractors or those that do jobs for him. He says he only does that in the event the contractor does a lousy job. And he says, as president, you want a guy like that who's watching your pennies and watching those who are taking advantage of those pennies. To David Stockman, the former Reagan budget director, who throughout his life has not paid a single contractor. I'm kidding. Good to see you.
Very good to be here.
Does he have a point?
Yeah, he has a point. No one develops billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of projects over a 40-year period and not pay his contractors. You get a bad reputation. No one will work with you. That's the end. So he was a tough negotiator, probably too tough. There's a lot of people
Would you
out
rather
there.
that kind of an SOB watching our money than
That
someone
would
who
be
just
okay. That would okay. We always said you want a junkyard dog in the budget office, and maybe if he was backed up by someone in the Oval Office of the same propensity, that wouldn't be so bad.
Now,
but
in the meantime, though, with all this stuff coming out, we're not talking about any of this.
Yeah, I know. But this campaign is over. It's not that Hillary won. It's that the national press committed a ritual political assassination of the Republican candidate. The howling pack of jackals that they've turned into in the last 8 years, last 8 days.
Do you think Ronald Reagan, I know a very
terrifying.
different guy, but do you think he could have survived this media today back in 1980?
I doubt it. I doubt
Really?
it. And, back in the summer of 1980, it was the same charge. He was a wild man. We didn't want his finger on the button, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But he was.
How did he answer that? What did he do?
He basically presented himself as non-threatening, thoughtful, articulate, balanced, friendly, pleasing, etc.
So things that
in a
Donald Trump
debate.
has not always done.
Yes, well, and I think I know something about that. I was his debating partner in the practices, yes,
Right.
in 1980. And the difference between the way Reagan prepared himself, listened to his advisors, worked on his lines over and over, tried to figure out how to communicate in a way that would be compelling. This guy isn't doing any of this. He's decided to take the whole ship down. This will be scorched earth. We're going to be so deep in the gutter by the time the election is over that
I can understand his frustration, and he is right about the disproportionate attention. We've clocked it, and we're going to be doing more about it, about how much time has been devoted to his scandals, whatever you want to call them, versus Hillary Clinton's and the Wikileaks that actually are far more deeply disturbing. But leaving that aside, does he keep bringing them up to his advantage, or to this scorched earth analogy you use, he just goes out in a blaze of glory?
Well, whether it's his advantage or not, that's what's going to happen. It will be scorched earth.
You see no scenario under which he can win.
Let's understand what happened here, okay? This is not just a flawed character. The ruling elites, as I call them, Washington, Wall Street elites, are petrified of a Trump presidency. They are petrified of someone in the Oval Office who hasn't been drinking the Kool-Aid for 30 years, who thinks, well, maybe NATO is obsolete, because it is, who thinks that maybe Janet Yellen doesn't walk on water, that interest rates at zero for 94 months are creating a huge bubble, as he called it, one big, fat, ugly bubble. So they have decided he must be taken down at all costs, and that's what this is.
So you think there'll likely be more tapes, even the way they rolled out? And we see that cozy relationship with Clinton. Whether you love Hillary Clinton or not, I mean, it's very clear she was in tight, and these exchanges with establishment media figures proves it, which could also prove their reluctance to showcase a lot of these type of exchanges.
Yeah, of course. The national media is in the tank for the establishment, for the status quo, for the Clinton organization. And they're in the tank for what the Fed is doing. And frankly, when it comes to foreign policy, the military-industrial complex, they're equally uncritical. They're not doing the job. I grew up in the 70s. Remember what happened with all these hearings and all the abuses that were going on in the FBI and the whole national security apparatus, and there were open hearings, and they got to it. Look at the media today. They just report whatever the Pentagon
Well, the same media
out.
is the one that's zeroing in on these studies, both of their tax and spending plans. It
Yeah.
says that Hillary's, with her roughly $2 trillion in taxes over 10 years, makes better debt sense than Donald Trump's big tax cuts. And they say the math favors her boosting the economy than him. What did you think of that?
I think it's irrelevant what these studies are saying, because after this election, we're going to have a dysfunctional government that is going to be so dysfunctional, so raw, so fractious, so politically, driven, that nothing will happen for a couple of years.
So the debt continues spiraling?
So the debt is on automatic pilot. It's going to be back at the $1 trillion range. We just had a new 35% increase last year. We're back up to $600 billion.
You're talking about a deficit we'll be looking at
we're
just
looking
1
at
year,
$1 trillion. Okay, and I think we're looking at another recession. No one outlawed the business cycle. We're looking at a baby boom retirement wave that's incredible. No one canceled the baby boom. You put all that together, and we are going to be so deep in the soup fiscally.
Do you worry, as well, some on Wall Street have, about, it used to be an uncertainty, now they're worried that it could be more of a certainty, that Hillary Clinton wins and takes either the House and or Senate, and that all bets are off in that one, because it would just promote more spending?
No, I don't think so. I think the House, that's why Ryan has moved to separate himself. Right. He's going to defend his majority. I think the election...
The Senate, maybe not.
Well, the election in the House happened in the gerrymanders years ago. It's not happening in a few marginal districts today. So whatever the hot sentiments are of the moment in the nationwide election is not going to really drive.
But she would be more emboldened in that environment. That's, again, assuming...
She might be more emboldened, right, but they're going to be out for revenge. The House is going to become a killing field for anything that the Clinton administration tries to do. And if they're going to have one investigation after another. People should be thinking about this. And if they can find half the reason, they will start impeachment hearings. I really believe that will happen.
All right. David Stockman, thank you very, very much. We are going to have Colin McShane joining me just very shortly, giving you the very latest update on the electoral map. Now, that there are roads that are closing for Donald Trump to get to that 270 electoral votes. But I'm not stressed, despite what you've heard, and a lot of people who've sort of buried his chances. They're not all gone. We'll explore that after this. In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, some of them, I'm sure, had to be turned away here. Only so many human beings can fit at a location. These crowds were being drawn hours ago and waiting on long lines to get a chance to hear from Donald Trump. So his base is still rabid, still with him. The question is, can he build beyond that? Can he keep them going to the polls? He's going to try this out in New Hampshire and Maine and elsewhere. Meanwhile, Colin McShane has been sort of crunching the numbers and the electoral paths, 270 votes. Where does he stand?
Well, you know, Frank Luntz was telling you earlier, it's going to be hard to move the needle now. And as we turn to our electoral map, I think that maybe is one of the more important comments that we've heard so far this hour, because the way we've colored in this map here behind me is we've taken the states that are either solidly blue or leaning blue and pre-colored them blue. Same thing for red. So where does that leave us? Over 300, 270 needed to win for Hillary Clinton as of this morning, 180 for Donald Trump. So Trump It's not like there's a path there that he can go down. It's a path that is currently blocked that he needs to remove that roadblock from. So the obvious thing is that he needs to take the 4 states that are still on the map and put those in his column: North Carolina and Ohio, Utah, which, believe it or not, is still in play largely because of Evan McMullen, and win in Arizona. But that still leaves him obviously far short. So then you look at blue states and you say, well, if you're Mr. Trump, where do you take a state and start to turn it? I mean, there's no other choice but to start with Florida, take the 29 electoral votes there. But even if you do that, Hillary Clinton is still above the 270 needed to win. So that brings us to today and Mr. Trump's travel schedule that Neil was just talking to you about, going to the far northeast section of our country to go to 2 states that have 4 electoral votes each. So as we go to the polling on those states, here's what we see. First of all, in New Hampshire, Hillary Clinton at the moment is favored to win New Hampshire. That's why we have it leaning blue, 41-38 in a 4-way race. However, Donald Trump has been close there in the past. He's still hoping that he can turn it around, take those 4 electoral votes and put it in his column. Yes, we understand the math tells us all of this is a long shot, but that's obviously what he's hoping. So why Maine? Well, Maine, when we look at the polling in Maine, you'll see something similar, that Hillary Clinton has the lead. She's been leading in the state of Maine, and she's even more of a favorite to win there, 42 to just over 37. However, Maine is a little bit unique in the fact that it's one of the states, along with Nebraska, that if you win the state, you don't get all the electoral votes. So the winner in Maine will get 2 electoral votes, the statewide winner. That leaves 2 on the board. There are 2 congressional districts, so you can pick up 1 electoral vote, say if you're Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton wins Maine, by being competitive in that particular congressional district. So that basically, Neil, is where we stand right now. It is a long shot, the idea of putting this all together in such a short amount of time. Not a lot of people think it can be done. The math doesn't tell us. Right. But that's the path. You need to take a blue state, starting with Florida, take it off the map and turn it around. So.
Now, these polls are shown. I know the Real Clear Politics average, but we go on just to average them all out.
That's what this is, yeah.
But they're all pre these latest women coming out, right?
Right. Most of them are. You know, the average, as you know, you take a number of polls and you put it all into one. So right. 5, 6, 7 polls could be in. So there may
even
be
in these
some
battleground state polls,
we don't have a lot of data, to your point.
Right.
After that, that's exactly right. We don't have a lot of data. After the last debate, we started to see that all the data that we did have was turning more in the favor of Hillary Clinton for the most part. Maybe not 100% across the board, but most of those battleground states were in her favor there.
All right, Connell, thank you very much. Connell will be back with us in the next hour, but it is interesting to note that if he can stop that bloodletting and actually build from there, post these allegations, that might be telling. Again, might be telling, but we shall see. In the meantime, battleground states, now they're again virtually all of them, as I was discussing with Connell, these latest allegations from women, still many going back many years. Having said that, though, it is tight in a lot of them. Nevada, just as you saw there, included. Nevada, of course, has always had a sort of a tenuous, particularly among Democrats there, particularly among Bernie Sanders supporters there, a tenuous relationship with Hillary Clinton. They didn't believe her anti-trade sentiment. They didn't believe her anti-Wall Street railing. They didn't believe a lot of this stuff. And then, lo and behold, these WikiLeaks come out that confirm a lot of that. And then there was this idea that maybe Clinton forces were working a bit too cozily with the Democratic establishment to secure her premier space, and all those superdelegates, all of that now ancient news, you would think, but maybe not. Author and Crowded TV founder Adrian Ashley. Adrian, very good to have you. The more we get on these WikiLeaks stuff, I guess it depends on the amount of coverage I get, which is not much, but the more Sanders supporters' worst fears and worst suspicions are realized. Does it boomerang on her in that state? The polls are competitive. What do you think?
I think that the polls are not accurate because everything that we said happened, it's now been proven that it actually happened. Everything that we suspected, it's now been proven. But the media is not covering the fact that WikiLeaks is out there. You have 99% coverage on Trump making a lewd comment 11 years ago, and you don't have really any coverage of what Clinton said at her speeches. And we've been asking her to disclose those for a year.
So let me ask you about that. When you say these polls are not accurate and they show her with a slight lead, you don't buy that?
I don't buy that.
Really?
I don't buy that at all. Here's the thing. If you look at the number of people who show up at the rallies, just count the bodies. You have Trump filling stadiums. You have Hillary barely filling high school gymnasiums. It's not the same level of enthusiasm. So when people get called, and I get called in Nevada probably 3 times a day for different polls.
Is that right?
It's a lot of polling going on. And, you know, they're calling people, but they're calling people who are on landlines. They're not calling the cell phone people. They're not calling the millennials. They're not calling the Bernie Sanders people. And a lot of Nevada Bernie Sanders supporters are still Bernie or bust. And unfortunately, through some form of shenanigans, I'm going to call it shenanigans, Jill Stein is not on the ballot. And she was likely to pick up 40% of the Bernie Sanders delegates and all the voters. So
but
she's not on the ballot.
I know, but where do they go? That's always been the question, Andrew. Do they, whatever their suspicions of Hillary Clinton, jump to Donald Trump, or do they opt out? They not participate? What?
Most of them are going to Gary Johnson as a strict protest vote, because even though Gary Johnson doesn't have the same values as Bernie Sanders, if you meet the man, he has the same honesty as Bernie Sanders and his vice president, Bill Weld.
What are you going to do, Adrian, if you mind?
I'm voting Johnson.
Really?
I'm voting for a third party because in 4 years, I want to make sure that we have more than 2 choices. I think the 2-party system is what is destroying any semblance of bipartisan or any progress that we could possibly have, because when you watch them in Congress, they bounce off each other like magnets repelling each other. They can't work together because the party comes before the people, and we need to break that up. It's a monopoly.
Thank you very much. Very good having you.
Thank you.
That could be interesting. We'll see if she's right about that. She's right there. She should know. All right, in the meantime, forget about what you heard about Donald Trump. Did you hear these Clinton emails mocking Catholics and evangelicals? Good Lord. We don't have the Lord, but we have one of his surrogates here, a good father, outraged. After this. All right, well, you didn't hear from me, but there's a debate. On Wednesday, it's in Vegas. Our Chris Wallace moderating it. Some basic issues are going to come out of the 5 or 6. They have to deal with the debt, the economy, terror. This is sort of like the wheelbarrow for Donald Trump. But again, he did very well in that town hall format, which this is not. To Stephen Schmidt, he is an Iowa State University political science professor, how he figures this format, especially at this time, will go. What do you think, Professor?
Well, I think neither of them are going to talk about the topics they're supposed to talk about. You know, right. The thing will go off into all kinds of directions because the news cycle is so contaminated with, on the one hand, the hacked emails, on the other hand, you know, more women coming out and Donald Trump defending, you know, his reputation. So I think we'll see a lot of that.
All right. Now, if that is the case, and I know Chris Wallace will try to control that, but like you say, oftentimes it's very, very tough. Let's say it's a 1-1 tie now with these debates. Hillary Clinton winning in the first, he came back and rebounded in the second. The pattern of late over the recent presidential election years has been, you know, whoever wins the second wins the third and can oftentimes close the deal. Very different scenario with Donald Trump, but what do you think?
I think it's very possible, and you know, we don't know what other Wikileaks are going to come out just before the debate, and if it's something spectacular that people can actually understand, except for people like you and I and political wonks, we understand what's in there. But you know, I stood in line here in Nevada and in Story County voting the other day on the first day of voting, and people weren't talking about WikiLeaks, and they weren't talking about Trump's personal behavior. They wanted to know more about the economy and jobs and how to conduct foreign policy.
You know, I think there's some of what you say, Professor, so you should automatically run the other way and come up with a different opinion. But it's that I think they each have their suspicions or their dim views of each candidate. In other words, a lot of these allegations, they don't shock people about Donald Trump. A lot of these revelations about how Hillary Clinton says one thing and feels another, and the WikiLeaks trove of emails released don't exactly shock people. So now they're focused on issues, if you're right, and then who is the edge there and who could use this debate to their advantage to push that edge? What do you think?
Well, obviously, Donald Trump could really score big if he sticks to those topics, because if he has some policy positions on issues and some suggestions on how we can improve the economy and how we can conduct our foreign policy better, that will make him presidential. As you said, nobody's surprised that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were scheming things. And, Donald Trump was a celebrity on TV on reality shows. So I think a lot of people are not that shocked that, the entertainment industry is, pretty raw. And so these things, to some extent, are not as shocking as some of the media are making them out. But
Professor, you mentioned that people are more inclined to understand and grasp the Donald Trump allegations than they are the WikiLeaks allegations. So does that give Hillary Clinton an advantage?
Well, it does, except I wonder if she really wants to continue to press on those particular issues, because they're kind of taking care of themselves. You know what I'm saying? In other words, she doesn't have to point out to them that a woman said that he reached under her skirt. That's big news already.
Gotcha.
And so, it's very difficult to tell how this debate is going to go. Maybe Donald Trump's teleprompter will go down again.
Yeah. What do you think will happen in the end? Most people seem to think it'd be a Hail Mary pass for Donald Trump to win this thing. I look at these polls, Professor, and they're very competitive in battleground states within a couple of points. So, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, they are. I think it's going to be, as we always know, in the end, everything tightens up, right? It'll be probably a very close race. And we'll have to wait until election night. And, then after that, it gets even more interesting.
Yeah, especially after election night. Professor, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil.
All right. We did talk about the WikiLeaks stuff. Now, Hillary Clinton is off the campaign trail, apparently studying up for the third and final debate. Rich Edson in Chappaqua, New York, with how Team Clinton is dealing with all of this. Sir.
Hey, good morning, Neil. And there are continued questions of Democrats and those in the Clinton campaign about this almost daily release now of John Podesta's emails by WikiLeaks. The approach from the Clinton campaign is essentially refuse to discuss the content of those emails, the controversies within them, and even really refuse to authenticate whether they're actually the emails that come from his campaign instead, or his email account. Instead, they are deflecting this entire controversy to the alleged perpetrators of this hack, the Russians.
Governor Pence himself condoned the Russians, and we think that that speaks pretty big volumes about what Donald Trump needs to admit. And beyond that, we're not going to comment about the stolen emails.
The campaign is also referring reporters to former national security officials who, with the campaign, have expressed outrage at the idea that a foreign government could tamper with a U.S. election. Hillary Clinton arrived from the West Coast back here to the East Coast last evening. She was out west doing some fundraising. She held a couple of events in California and in Washington State involving Elton John and Macklemore. After her fundraising trip, she's now back studying for Wednesday's debate here in Chappaqua, New York. She has no public events scheduled this weekend, Neil, and that's something the Trump campaign has criticized her campaign for, saying that she lacks the stamina and the energy to campaign or be president. Hillary Clinton addressed that yesterday at a fundraiser. She said that her campaign schedule has been grueling and that she has the stamina to do so. Her campaign also says they expect after Wednesday's debate that her campaign schedule will intensify. Neil, back to you.
Rich, real quickly, when you were mentioning about how they're really dismissing a lot of the WikiLeaks stuff because of the source of getting them out there, the Russians and all, so not to comment on them, I guess, period. I don't remember anyone in the campaign questioning their accuracy or veracity, though, or that these things really happened. What have you heard?
What their line is on this is we're not going to confirm or discuss this. We're not going to help WikiLeaks. At times, they sort of delve into the conversation surrounding what's in those emails. But their line on this is usually every time you ask them about a specific case in a specific email, they'll say, we're not going to confirm that this is accurate or this did come. Instead, we'll talk about how terrible the Russians are for having done this.
All right. Thank you, my friend Rich Edson in Chappaqua, New York, following Team Clinton right now as she gets ready for the third and final debate. There is some news going on today, though, with John Kerry's meeting with his counterparts from Russia and Iran, all of this on Syria, with Iran saber-rattling, the Russians balking at any type of an agreement when it comes to dealing with refugees. And then there's this tiny little issue of how that whole thing could blow up before Election Day. We're on that. with the guy who killed Osama bin Laden after this.
Dayton.
You ever get the feeling that maybe this is a good time for both candidates to go to confession? They're not Catholics, of course. I don't know what Trump is, actually. But if you think about what's come up in this campaign with the charges and the language out of Donald Trump, and then the flip-flopping and maybe outright lies out of Hillary Clinton, what's someone like Father Robert Sirico to do? The Action Institute president at Grand Rapids, Michigan. Father, there are a lot of kids who are hearing this. There are a lot of Catholics and evangelicals who don't like the way they're dismissed in these emails by the Clinton campaign folks. What do you tell folks?
Well, you tell them the truth. You tell them that what we have here is a political party attempting to manipulate and undermine the religious beliefs of religious institutions in this country. You have to tell them the truth. It's not a matter of confession. It's a matter of exorcisms. I mean, this is diabolical.
You're talking specifically about what the Clinton campaign was saying in these emails about Catholics, evangelicals, particularly conservative Catholics, conservative evangelicals.
Yeah. The entire season, but this in particular right now, which is what we're talking about. I mean, you have sheer arrogance going on. You have disdain for the beliefs of others. And then you see, basically what you see here is their view of religion. And by the way, whether they deny the authenticity of this or not, let's remember that Hillary Clinton herself said the time has come for religious organizations to change their outdated teachings. She said that publicly in a speech. So this just reveals what's going on among themselves. What you have is an attempt to undermine religious institutions on the part of political organization. And this should alarm everyone across the board, whether they're progressives who are concerned about the division of power in this country, or religious people who are insulted at the disdain being shown to their beliefs. No wonder they don't want to talk about these things. They can't possibly talk about these things and come out looking good.
They come back at folks like you, Father, and say, well, he sure is upset about what we might or might not have said or emailed about Catholics, but not a word about Donald Trump and what he has said, or maybe worse, done to women, you say.
Oh, I'm on record about what I think about Donald Trump. You know, this is not about my complaints about Hillary Clinton are in no way an endorsement of Donald Trump,
Gotcha.
His behavior. I think you have a similar thing going on there, because his outward behavior should not be surprising anyone. What they caught on a microphone shouldn't surprise anyone. That's exactly what he's always said as he's portrayed himself. What we have in this nation right now is a crisis. We've lost the ability to have conversations with each other, and everyone is kind of pulled off into this balkanization. We've lost a common grammar that we used to have that enabled us to speak past our differences. And this is the secularization of our society, the banalization of sexuality, and we're going to have to reconstitute this whole thing after this election, no matter who gets elected.
You know, we talk about the court's tone of this campaign, period. And I'm wondering, though, with some of the discussions about Catholics and evangelicals, that if we were to switch Muslim there, whether this would be causing much more outrage. What do you think?
Of course. Absolutely. You know, I think for a long time, traditional Christianity has taken it on the nose.
Right.
Because of the politicization of religion. You see this particularly in this batch of emails that we've been talking about, that even religious believers, these people largely, as I understand, are Catholics. I don't know if they practice their faith. But what you see the priority is not religion for them, it's politics. To disdain someone for baptizing their children Catholic, coming out of the mouth of a Catholic, I mean, that's why I say this is more than a matter of confession. This is a matter of exorcism.
Yeah, there was a much more targeting of conservative Catholics. The Catholic monolithic, though it might be in terms of voting, tends to vote as a bloc for Democrats. Now, there's a distinction, as folks like you reminded me, with practicing Catholics versus non-practicing, young versus old.
Right.
But why is that? Why, as a bloc, why are they reliably Democratic?
Well, that goes back in history over 100 years. You had the Republicans being know-nothings and nativists. They were anti-immigrants, particularly at that time, Catholic immigrants. There was a kind of crypto-racism in what they were saying. They were afraid of the power of the Roman Catholic Church. All of this is embedded in part of the elitism of American history, and Catholics reacted to that. And then especially after the war, there were a lot of benefits offered to these immigrant groups after the war, and Catholics aligned with a Democratic Party at that time that is different than the Democratic Party today, because at least they were family friendly, they were patriots, they were certainly pro-life, pro-marriage, all of those things. This has all been thrown on its head right now, and that's why I say after the election there's a lot of work to do.
There is indeed. Father Robert Sirico, thank you. Very good seeing you again.
Good to see you again, Neil.
All right. We have a lot more on this, including a breakdown of those various scandals, Wikileaks and the emails there, and then, of course, Donald Trump and all of his woes. The view from up north, I'm talking Canada. Lord Conrad Black is next. To a lot of swing states, forget about polls, looking nationally at the vote here. Look at these battleground states. Connell McShane here looking at 3 of them that could tell a lot about how this all ends up. Connell.
Well, these are, Neil, the big 3, I think. Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, we're going to highlight as I turn to the map here. The problem for Donald Trump when we, base this on data is that he still, even when we turn all of these states in his favor in a hypothetical, has some issues. The map is colored in here, as we were talking, if you were with us last hour, that states that are either solid or leaning blue, and Hillary Clinton is over 300 electoral votes. Now, 2 of the 3 we'll talk about are true toss-ups. So with that in mind, if we take North Carolina and we take Ohio and turn them red, it obviously is a help for Donald Trump. Even if you take Florida and take it out of the blue column where it's leaning right now, according to the polling data we have, and turn it red, it's still a problem for Donald Trump, and there's your problem. Hillary Clinton is still above the 270 needed to win. So just keep that kind of in the back of your head as we look at the latest polling from these swing states. He will need more than this if he's going to turn the tide and put the election in his favor. That's it. Here are the numbers as they stand in the states that I talked about. Florida, we're using the Real Clear Politics average of the polls that gets you up to the middle of this week, taking all of the credible polls and averaging them together. Hillary Clinton 45, Donald Trump 42. It's about a 3-point lead, so certainly still within striking distance here, although Hillary Clinton does have the lead and Florida has been leaning in her direction. Now, with that, let's go to the other ones. We'll take a look at the other 2 states that we have lined up for you and see where the polling is. It's fairly similar in North Carolina, as you'll see, but Ohio's the closest of the bunch. It has been throughout. It's an obvious must-win for Donald Trump, but he only has a 1-point lead there, according now to the latest polling, which came out this week from the Wall Street Journal and NBC. Same poll we're using here, that midweek poll, NBC, the Wall Street Journal in North Carolina. Hillary Clinton's up 4. That was one poll. I mean, it has been closer in some other polls, but the point is Donald Trump is, he has some work to do, even in those key swing states. So we ended here on the big map, Neil. We still left on the board Utah, which, as we've been reporting this week, thanks in large part to Evan McMullen, is seen as a toss-up state right now. It's closer. And also Arizona. So, yes, these are the big 3, these states. If Donald Trump can turn them in his favor, he's obviously in better shape, but it's not enough. That's the state of the race and where things stand right now.
You know what I notice a lot in these polls?
Yes.
It's not so much where she has improved. It's not so much her going up as Donald Trump coming down. And you've got to wonder with these latest women and their allegations whether that continues or he arrests it, because it's not as if support for her is surging as much as support for him is dropping.
That's fair, and I think it speaks to what his strategy might be on the other side of it, right? Because when he comes out and is so aggressive as he was, we'll see what he does in New Hampshire and Maine today, is he trying to just suppress her support so that it's not as enthusiastic and almost bring her down to meet him? That appears, a lot of people think that's the only strategy he has left at this point.
All right, we'll see. Connell, thank you very, very much. The one thing we do know is that the WikiLeaks stuff, or the revelations that have come out and what you have heard, has not really registered in the polls or dramatically hurt her. It could be because there isn't a lot of coverage of it, a lot more coverage of Donald Trump and his travails. Why a guy who was a publishing tycoon finds that a little bit disturbing after this.
The other guy's base is what I grew up in. You know, I'm basically your standard redneck.
This is in the swamp of crazy that has been fed over and over and over and over again.
You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
All right. They're obviously entitled to their own views, but when you extend it to those who vote for Donald Trump, and are that dismissive? Is that such a good thing? Does that give you insight into where prominent Democrats are coming from when they look at the folks who are supporting Donald Trump? Because say what you will, and you can see the closest to some of those battleground states. There are a lot of them. Are they all just deplorable redneck idiots? Adam Lashinsky, Fortune magazine in San Francisco. Madison Giziota, The Washington Times in Washington, D.C. Last but not least, Amy Holmes, Rasmussen Reports, right here with me. What do you think of that, Amy, by just sort of chastising? It's one thing to criticize the candidate, but extending it to those who would even want to vote for him.
Well, I think that it's nasty and it's unfair, and I think it's also tactically unwise. I think part of what they're trying to do is get out the vote, get their base motivated to go to the polls to defeat Donald Trump. But for Hillary Clinton or whomever takes the White House, you want to be the president of all the people, and when you've dismissed this group of voters, it's very hard to get that kind of support and solidarity that I think a lot of Americans want. And I'll tell you that when it comes to Rasmussen Reports polling, we're still showing volatility in this race. That on Monday, Hillary Clinton was ahead of Donald Trump by 7 points after the big Access Hollywood video. Right. But by Friday, Donald Trump was up 2 points, 43 to 41, among likely voters.
An outlier. Your distinction is that it's among likely voters.
Among likely voters, and also it's a four-way race that we're including Jill Stein and Gary Johnson in those numbers. So I think it's unwise for the Hillary team to be putting. I mean, it sounds to me that they're going low, they're not going high.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, Madison, one of the things I say, besides what prominent Democrats, including the present president and the last president, the woman who wants to be president, say about Donald Trump's base, is what they're saying about other voters out there, evangelicals and Catholics, and those who might not be big fans of Hillary Clinton's. It's coming through again in these emails. But is there an arrogance there that could come back to bite their hiney?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at a lot of the independent voters or undecided voters who, you know, maybe were on the fence thinking about voting for Hillary, when they hear these comments, especially about Catholics and evangelicals, I don't think they're going to be willing to jump that fence and vote for her. But at the same time, I don't think these comments like basket of deplorables and things like that are really going to have a large effect on the election. We look back to 2012, Mitt Romney's 47%, Barack Obama's "you didn't build that" comment. Right. These things have a very minor effect. And I think what voters, especially undecided voters, really want to hear about is the economy. We're not hearing about the fact that we have less men between the prime working ages of 25 to 54 working than we did at the end of the Great Depression. These are the things that matter, and these are the things that I think Donald Trump should focus on when you have these voters that are being turned away by certain words that have been spoken by Hillary Clinton in her campaign.
You know, Adam, you are a progressive, but you're also a very decent human being. I'm not just...
Thank you, Neil.
And yet, it's rare, by the way, on the right or the left, I might point out. But you must be tortured a little bit when you hear this kind of language or this dismissive language. Now, you might not like the candidate, but to disparage the candidate's supporters is never a good thing, I think. It just reveals a character flaw in yourself, doesn't it?
Well, thank you for what you said about me, Neil. I would always prefer a civil conversation. I joke about that a lot on our program because I'd prefer that, and I certainly would prefer the people running for president of the United States be civil to each other. I think that would be better. I would quibble with what Amy said. I agree with what Amy said in that, except I think that it is strategically unwise for the Democrats to be making these comments, not tactically perhaps. And I agree with Madison. This isn't going to hurt them with the people. This isn't going to hurt them with their base or with Trump's base. They've made their minds up. So sure, we shouldn't say these kinds of things about anybody in our country. We should be positive.
I think there's maybe people are flabbergasted on the left with Donald Trump supporters and how they stuck by him through all of this stuff. And we saw signs of that through these lines in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I'm sure there'll be similar lines tonight when he speaks in Maine. And they can't quite understand that. And whether it's the president yesterday, blaming Republicans. You made this Frankenstein. I'm paraphrasing it.
Which
what do you think of that?
Strange when you consider the solidarity around Bill Clinton when he was president of the United States and going through his own travails, as you put it, in terms of sex scandal. And you saw great support and loyalty for that president, and his supporters saying it was because of his positions on policy.
Absolutely. And there wasn't a mad rush at the time, then or even now, to get any of his accusers on air.
Certainly
but
not.
There is
and you
now
saw a huge phalanx of feminist supporters who said he may have done all of these awful things, but he's great on the issues that matter to us.
Right.
I think you're seeing a similar thing on the Donald Trump side. That you see his supporters saying, I may not agree with his behavior here, but he's right on some of the issues that are important to me.
Do you think, Madison, that there is any chance for movement? We talked about national polls that don't look good for Donald Trump, depending on the poll, of course. But in battleground states, even those he is losing, it's still within a couple of points. Now, that is pre these latest women coming out with their allegations. But what do you expect to happen? I mean, the debate obviously rises in importance, but is it too late to move the meter? What do you think?
I don't think we're going to see a lot of movement within the bases on either side, but with the undecided voters, like I mentioned earlier, I think there's more of them than people even realize, and I think we're going to see movement, and we could see a lot of movement in these polls. And like we've talked about before, a lot of these polls maybe aren't representative of what we're going to see in November because they're not accounting for a lot of new voters. They're not accounting for a lot of voters, on cell phones, things like that. They're really polling a lot of landlines, which tends to be older voters.
Yeah,
and I think that Trump's message...
Rarely are they dramatically off. Now, they could be dramatically off, but Adam, do you see a surprise coming?
No, I think we see exactly where this is going. And I would just, Amy, I think what you said is really interesting. I don't think Trump's voters agree with his policies. I think they agree that they want change. That's what they like. They want this whole thing blown up. And they're not changing their minds about that. And just as I think most voters aren't changing their minds right now.
Adam, I would agree with you that a lot of Trump supporters, I say he's their Incredible Hulk and he's going to go to Washington and smash, smash, smash. But remember, when his campaign really took off is when he started addressing the issue of illegal immigration. And that's when Republican primary voters really paid attention.
Very good point. And that will be one of the subjects in the debate, which you might not have heard is coming up next week. All right, guys, I want to thank you very, very much. In a debate, Donald Trump's goal, of course, is to get under her skin. Many argue that, she's sitting on this lead. Maybe she wants to run out the clock. But it is possible to get under her skin. It is possible to agitate her. Martin O'Malley did a few times. Not that he's advising Donald Trump to do just that, but he is here. Next. I always think debates are about getting under the other guy's skin or getting them off script or just sort of jostling them a little bit. Say what you will, a former Maryland governor, presidential candidate, Martin O'Malley did do that a few times with Hillary Clinton, so it can be done. She's a very good debater, but then again, he's a very good debater. Not that he's going to give Donald Trump any tips here, but it will sort of say the issues that will likely come up. So, Governor, it's very good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you. Good to be with you, Neil.
So, we know these issues that have been outlined that are going to come up in the debate. I almost think you can throw that away, Governor, because of all the news developments with Donald Trump and certainly even Wikileaks with Hillary Clinton. So I don't know how my friend Chris Wallace sorts all that out or how much the candidates ignore on that. But what do you think? I mean, how will this debate firm things up? There was a number of Hillary Clinton aides on air, off air, saying almost she could sit on this lead and run out the clock. What do you think of that?
Oh, I wouldn't agree with that advice at all. I think that what Hillary Clinton has the opportunity to do right now is to take this conversation with the voters, and believe it or not, that's what this election's supposed to be, rather than tabloid entertainment. I think she needs to speak, as I heard one of your panelists saying, to the issues that people care about around their own kitchen table. After the kids are in bed at night, how are we going to save for college? What are we going to do about our retirement? Is your job going to be there in the future? I mean, these are the issues that Hillary Clinton has the ability to talk about now. In ways I think she wasn't able to talk about in the very first debate, or as much as she would have liked to, in the second debate. And I'm glad, frankly, they're going to talk about immigration reform. I think there is an argument to be made that one of the drags on wages is forcing 11 million of our neighbors to work and live in the shadow economy. I believe, and there are many studies to support this, that immigration reform will actually be a help to our economy.
Well, you might be right about that, but
to make wages go up.
I raised this, though, because you did in the debates you had with her, and certainly Bernie Sanders did, even after you left the race, that we don't know the real Hillary Clinton on some of these issues, like how she gets along with the banks or what she wants to do to rein them in. She says something quite different to them behind closed doors. Or on trade, when you were calling her on some trade issues, it turns out behind closed doors she might have been open to open and unfettered trade. So I guess what I'm saying here is Donald Trump is going to try to seize on that. There are two Hillary Clintons. Could that come back to bite her?
Well, I think everybody, by this point, I chuckle for a second there, Neil. I think everybody knows Hillary Clinton. I think they know her better than almost anybody else in public life.
Well, you think you do, right? You think you do, and then you get revelations and emails. I know that are being dismissed because the Russians hack. I understand that. But they do reveal a different Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Neil. I mean, I've read some of these WikiLeaks things and from the Russians, and I'm still more disturbed not by what I read by them in the transcripts. I don't think there's really anything so sensational there. I am disturbed that the Russians are breaking into the Democratic Party's headquarters and their emails. But I think those things, look, everybody knows Secretary Clinton has been on the public stage a long time. She has had some issues where she has evolved and changed her mind. The Democratic Party's platform is more progressive now because of the exchange of ideas on issues like trade or other things as well. Climate change. I hope they bring up climate change. There's a huge amount of jobs that could be created if, as a nation, we embrace this challenge and make it our business opportunity.
But are you surprised, Governor, these issues, which she has espoused, she has gone a lot harder left, if you will, for lack of a better term, on issues near and dear to you, certainly near and dear to Senator Sanders, but that her base just isn't super jazzed. They obviously got a little bit more jazz with Al Gore campaigning on her behalf in Florida, talking up the aforementioned climate change. But they're still not, like, rabid for her. It's like they seem to be defaulting to her. What do you think the problem is?
Yeah, look, I've been out there a lot. I've been in Ohio, back to Iowa, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. After the first two debates, I did see, Neil, an uptick in the excitement among Secretary Clinton supporters, their willingness to actually engage and talk and explain to their neighbors why they are for her. And I think it's because she dispatched Donald Trump so readily in both of those debates. I mean, she appeared to be a commander-in-chief.
Many will argue, at least in the second debate, that didn't happen. Many argue it's a one-and-one deal. But leaving that aside, you have seen this what's come out in some of these WikiLeaks. I know you're not keen on yapping about it. I can understand that, but that there was a concerted effort on the part of the Clinton campaign.
Give me a try.
Here's what I want to know. But on the Clinton campaign, working closely with the Democratic National Committee, to your detriment and to Bernie Sanders' detriment, and that relationship was much cozier than we thought. In retrospect, it's bygones are bygones, I understand. But I talked to a Bernie Sanders supporter who was still very annoyed, still very angry, and still not willing to support Hillary Clinton because of those revelations. What about you?
Yeah, look, I think we all knew that was going on at the time. They never write the rules in such a way as to encourage challengers. And let's be honest here. Senator Sanders didn't have any trouble with the delayed debate schedule or the lack of debates when they were suiting his purpose. It was only later that he had a problem with that. But look, that's all water over the dam. I am supporting Secretary Clinton. And well, I think after every election, you need to look at how we handled our piece of this process. And I think we would have been better served. And I said again and again and again, in fact, very directly to the DNC, look, we should be having more debates. We should not be letting Donald Trump rise on the other side and being totally mum and silent all through the summer. That was cruddy. But look, that was then, and now we're in this conflict now. And I believe Trump is one of the greatest constitutional threats our republic has seen in a long time. And I hope that he is repudiated by the voters. And I don't want them dropping out. I want them to be beaten, and I want them to be beaten badly by right-minded Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
So, Governor, this is a news alert here. You're not for Donald Trump.
No. I believe this is a choice between freedom and fascism. I'm for Secretary Clinton.
That's a little extreme, but we'll see what happens. But, Governor, thank you very, very much.
Neil, thank you. Good being with you.
All right, Governor Martin O'Malley. All right, well, that sets the stage for, I think, what's going to be a raucous debate. We will, of course, be there. We're heading out to Vegas. We'll be there all week. Try the veal.